And welcome back. Here at Marlowe House Presents, this evening we'll be talking about how to play Numenera, and then by extension, how to play Cypher System. I'm Monica Marlowe.
I'm Andrew Marlowe.
I'm Scott.
Tonight we're going to give you a quick rundown about Money Cook Games, a little bit about their settings, and then a lot about how to play Numenera. Back in 2013, Money Cook Games published Numenera after a successful Kickstarter, in which they initially asked for $20,000 and got over $500,000. As a result, in the last 5 years, they have expanded both their product lines and their horizons to include 5 distinct product lines and numerous settings and counting, and they're growing. Numenera was their first setting, and it is set on Earth approximately 1 billion years in the future. And it's called the Ninth World because the popular belief is that Ninth World, there were 8 major worlds before this one that we're playing in. They won numerous Ennies for that initial launch, and as a result, they just kept growing.
They all, in addition to Numenera, they also produce a role-playing game called The Strange, which is set in modern-day Earth, but the characters often cross through various different realities, what the setting calls recursions. These are worlds frequently based on myth and fiction. You get places like 221B Baker Street. There's a galaxy at war that looks an awful like Battlestar Galactica and Star Wars and a bunch of other things kind of all mashed together. You can go to Oz. And then there's some completely new and unique settings, like Crow Hollow, where everybody are anthropomorphic crows. And then there's a couple of traditional fantasy type things. There's a weird science, super science setting. Tons of really cool places that you can go visit because they're out there, and there are threats that come from out there that can affect our world. So it has sort of this, what I would say is almost like an X-Files, Fringe, Planescape vibe going on. It's a very cool mishmash of settings and storylines. The next thing that they put out was the Cypher System Core Rulebook, and it was quickly followed by 3 settings. Gods of the Fall, which is a fantasy setting in which you can attain divinity. Predation, which is a futuristic game set in the Cretaceous past.
Cretaceous right? Might be.
I think it is.
I think it is. It definitely has dinosaurs.
Yes.
You can play dinosaurs.
Basically, a bunch of people from the future time traveled to the past. Time travel broke. They all got stuck.
And you can play dinosaurs.
And Volcano Day is coming.
That's a problem.
The last of those of the initial settings was Unmasked, and Unmasked is superheroes with teenagers and cosmic horror. So it's sort of like
Scooby-Doo?
No.
No.
Cthulhu.
The new one, the Netflix series.
Oh, Stranger Things.
Yeah, Stranger Things. Gosh.
Oh my gosh.
So different.
Definitely not Cthulhu.
Yeah. Stranger Things, and some sort of eldritch horror and supers. Kids make masks, it gives them powers, and they still have to be home by dinner.
You know, when they flip the front light, it's time to come home.
There are some new settings to come. They just did a Kickstarter for Your Best Game Ever, which was a system agnostic guide to playing your best game ever. And in addition to that core book, that system agnostic book, they kickstarted successfully 4 new setting guides, which are going to basically be suggestions and tips on how to run 4 different genres. So there'll be a book for horror, a book for sci-fi, a book for fantasy, and a book for fairy tales. But they will also include their own unique settings to go with it. So then those settings will be built with the same materials as were presented in your best game ever. So Monica, you want to talk about the Cypher System setting?
I would happily do that.
System basics?
So one of the more elegant parts of character creation is that your character is a complete thought. That when you create your character, it gives you all of the things you kind of need to know about your character in one sentence. So you have your character name, is a descriptor, type, who has a focus. And that becomes all sorts of different things. So in the case of the characters that Scott and I played last week, if you had a chance to watch that game, we're actually going to be playing them again, but we have advanced them to their next level. And I'll talk a little bit about that here in a minute. So Aranaya is a weird explorer who would rather be reading. And Scott is playing...
I'm playing Malcolm, who is a clever speaker who operates undercover.
So those descriptors, or adjectives as we know them from our early grammar classes in school, there's a bunch of them, and there are then elements that are attributed to them. So in the case of the weird, my character has an unnerving quality as well as some interesting aspects that add to it. And I'm not going to go through all of those right now because those will come. Some of that stuff's going to come out into play as you see how the characters are created. Every person at the table could all be weird. It's not a really great way to build your party, but it can happen. And sometimes you'll have two clever people or two strong people or two strong-willed people. There's a bunch of different descriptors. Explorer type. Explorer is essentially a class. And again, you can have multiple explorers or multiple speakers. The other classes for Numenera are actually the Glaive, which is sort of the fighter class, the Jack, which is sort of the rogue class, and the Nano, which is sort of the magic user, but not completely. And there are two additional, the Seeker and the... I knew I was going to forget this because we're looking at our Cypher books.
You're actually thinking there are three new ones. There's the Delve.
That's right. I'm thinking from the other one because Numenera has actually gone into a second edition, and so now there are there are six classes. The Seeker
types.
Was this. My apologies. There were six types. The Seeker was one of the earlier editions, but now they've replaced it with the Delve, which is a little bit more explory. There's a Delve. There's the Right, which is a builder. And then the leader class is Arcus. So they have added some different things to the game with the second edition. And since we don't have all of that information yet, because I haven't read everything yet.
But the ones you were looking for before were the two sort of retired types are Glint and Seeker.
That's it, Glint. That was the one. And that's kind of a bard-like type. And then ultimately... who you are is your focus, and that's where the bulk of your special abilities come in some aspects. No more than one person at the table should have the same focus. So my character would rather be reading. If we were playing with four other people, nobody else should have that. There's rides the lightning, wears a halo of fire. There's one that's ice. There's also
Wears a sheen of ice.
Wears a sheen of ice. Exists partially out of phase. There's a lot of different foci.
And some of them are non-magical, so you get things like fights with panache,
wields with two hands.
Throws with deadly accuracy.
Mm-hmm. One of my characters actually explores dark places, and we really have gone some dark places with that character. It's all in in the way you interpret that. So that's what the character sentence is, and it allows you to get a real good grasp of who your character is even before you sit down to play. So that's what the two characters we'll be looking at tonight are the ones that Scott and I actually played with in our last game session. So you kind of have a little bit of a feel of what our characters are. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the difficulties and how our characters are able to do things.
So when you're doing something in Numenera, you're going to perform a task, and when you're trying to perform a task, you set it. The GM will set a difficulty for you. Sometimes it's based on the level of, and at this point, level is the correct term for monsters and things. So you're looking at the difficulty level, whether it's the level of the creature or if it's just how difficult something is. Difficulties are set from 0 to 10, with 0 being automatic. You don't even have to do anything. So, you reach out and touch your nose. That's a difficulty 0. You can do it without having to make any sort of dice rolls. Walking upstairs should be a 0. Although sometimes there may be extenuating there are extenuating circumstances that may make things tough. But so you're looking at difficulties 0 to 10. Starting at about 7, they start to become functionally impossible because the target number you need on a die is 3 times the difficulty. So we roll a 20-sided die to accomplish anything, and the goal is to roll over the target number, which is 3 times the difficulty. So if the difficulty is set at 7, that sets a target number of 21, which is not something you can roll over or equal to on a 20-sided die. So how do you do things that are difficulty 7 and higher, or even something lower that you want to have be easier? There are a couple of different ways to ease the difficulty.
One is to offer the GM candy.
That never works.
The first official way outside of bribery, the first way to ease the difficulty is with skills. You can be trained or specialized in a skill. And training lowers the difficulty by 1 step. Specialization lowers it by 2. We will actually get to inabilities, which is the third state for skills, in just a minute. The next way you can affect the difficulty are with assets. Those are things that you have, material items typically, or situations that make doing whatever it is that you're doing easier. And then the primary last way to affect the difficulty is through effort. And your character sheet has instead of having say in Pathfinder D&D, you have attributes, and you roll and you add a modifier from your attribute. In the case of Numenera, Cypher System, Strange, all the Cypher System games, you have a pool. Instead of a bonus to a roll, you have a pool, and you can spend points out of this pool to lower the difficulty. Typically, it costs 3 points out of a given pool to lower the difficulty by 1 step. And that is called applying effort. You can apply as much effort as your character has on your sheet under the number for effort. There's a limit. Tier 1 characters are typically limited at 1. Tier 2 characters are about limited at an effort of 2, typically. And lost my train of thought. Oh, well.
I wasn't listening. I'm so sorry. I was taking notes. I don't know
Effort
where you
by
were.
tier.
Right. So your effort by tier. So you can spend effort out of your pool, or spend points out of your pools to affect your effort, to apply effort to something. So for example, you're
going to get brain surgery.
Right. All right. So you're gonna get brain surgery. You hope that your doctor is trained.
He better be.
Personally, I want my doctor to be specialized. So we're going to say that brain surgery is not something that you could do just off the street. So we're going to set that difficulty at an 8.
I mean, you could. I don't know that it would go well.
It's functionally impossible. So we're going to go with a difficulty 8. So as I hope my doctor is specialized, we're going to go ahead and say that lowers the difficulty to a 6. He still has to roll an 18 to successfully perform surgery. I don't like those odds. That's no good.
He probably wouldn't like those odds either.
That's what, a 10% chance of survival? No. I don't want a brain surgeon who only has a 10% survival rate.
He's so picky.
I have like a surgeon running through my head.
So the next thing that you could apply would be assets. So performing the surgery in a hospital. Hospital is definitely an asset, maybe 2. We're going to go ahead and call it 2. That's going to lower the difficulty by 2 steps because we're applying 2 assets. We're going to say the hospital and the equipment in the facility and the assistance from the people there. We're going to call that an asset. So that takes us from an 8 to a 4. Still has to roll a 12 in the die. Not really happy about this. Hopefully, my doctor is experienced and has had a couple of tears under his belt and is willing to actually put in effort when he's performing surgery on my brain. So let's hope that this doctor is at least tier 2.
Yeah.
So we'll call it tier 2. And so we'll say his effort and limit would be 2 effort. So he turns around and spends points out of his intellect pool to lower the difficulty by 2 more steps. So we have gone from a difficulty 8, functionally impossible, down to a difficulty of 2. Now he's only looking for 6s on the die.
And even I can occasionally roll a 6.
Still not really happy with these numbers, but I can probably live with these numbers. And that's how you do it. So then, can I see a 20?
Sure.
So let's see if I survive surgery. Go ahead and roll it.
Oh, you just wanted to see it.
Go ahead and roll it. Let's see if...
All right.
Did I live?
You live.
What'd you roll?
I rolled a 12.
Yay!
I live. So that's how you do things in the Cypher
That's why
system.
we don't let Scott do brain surgery.
That's why we
That's
don't
why
let
Scott do brain surgery now. So let's go back a little bit. We were talking about skills, trained and specialized make things easier. You can also have things called inabilities, which hinder the difficulty by 1 step. And that works in much the same way. It just goes the other direction.
My character actually has the inability social interactions because she's unnerving, because she's weird.
Right. So
I don't know why that's a problem.
When you're doing things, sometimes you also roll really high or really low. So there are special rolls for those like critical success, critical failure type situations, and we'll go into those as we actually hit play, but they do exist.
All right. So Andrew's touched base a little bit on the expenditure of effort, but our stat pools serve as more than just ways to lower our difficulties. It is also our health. So as we progress through an encounter, we might be spending might to make our...
Why don't we tell them what the 3 stat pools are?
Well, maybe I should do that first. There's might, there's speed, and there's intellect. And they pretty much do what they just sound like they do. So if you're in combat and you are using your weapon to swing, you would perhaps spend out of your might pool to lower your difficulty so that you can hit better. But one of the things that we haven't talked about is, at least yet, is that only the GM rolls dice.
No.
I apologize. I can't believe I just said that. Only the players roll dice. The GM sets the difficulties. So when when NPCs or monsters are attacking us, we also typically roll a speed defense, or we might roll a might defense and attempt to take that damage. So if we're trying to get out of the way, we might spend out of our speed pool. So as things start to progress through any encounter, we start to be weaker in our abilities to do things. And eventually, if we take enough damage, which initially comes off of our might pool, we will then start on what we call the damage track. And that lowers our abilities to do different things. The first step is impaired, and that makes it harder to do things, as it sounds. And then the second, once you've lost all of your might pool, which is typically what you lose first, but any pool that you lose all of your points in, you will become impaired. After you lose all of the points in your second pool, then you become debilitated. And unless for some reason you have some speed left, you can't move at that point. So it starts to become very difficult to do anything when you don't have any points in your pools. So effort then comes out of those pools, and that's kind of where those two things become a resource that you have to manage. Talking a little bit about your pools and your stats and stuff like that, NPCs are different. While Andrew mentioned that they have levels, and typically they're 1 to 10, they really don't have any pools. They just have levels. And usually their things are then based off of that level. So if you were making up a basic NPC and they were a level 3, their hit points would be 3 times that, or 9. Any interactions with them, if they were nothing out of the ordinary or special, players would only have to roll a 9 to do anything to engage with them. They want to hit that creature, they roll a 9, they hit it. They want to get out of the way, they roll a 9, they sidestep it. But there are ways to modify that. And so if your monster is, say, a snake, which is really fast and really small, it would perhaps have a higher speed defense than, maybe first or level snake might have. If it has a venom attack, it might actually have a little bit more in its attack damage that it does.
It might actually just go straight off your damage track. It can bypass your stat pools altogether.
Yes. So there are a lot of different ways to make these NPCs and monsters different than just a very static, it's a level 3 or it's a level 5 or it's a level 2. And it does give then the GM definitely a little bit of flexibility. We haven't really talked about the finessing of being a GM for this game, but I can tell you that it is.
I think that's a later stream.
It is definitely a later stream, but in short, it is a lot easier to manage things on the fly. If your players are having a really hard time, it's very, there's not a lot of moving parts, and so you can change things a little without having to redesign an entire stat block. Now, that said, there's some really beautiful pieces of art and entire long pages that talk all about these monsters in the bestiaries and in the core rule books. So I don't want you to think that all of the monsters are just little haikus, which is what I call them. And they are literally in adventures, sidebars, no more than a tiny little paragraph about an inch in many cases. Although that's not completely,
It sort of
not
depends.
all of them. It does depend
it sort of
on
depends.
But it is not uncommon to just see 3 or 4 lines for the monster and then a page reference. But really all you need is just those really small core stats. And I think that leads us back then to combat, which I have kind of already covered.
Which is fine. But there's some other things that are worth noting in combat. So like Monica said, the players are the only ones who are rolling dice. So players are in charge of rolling attacks and defense rolls. And those go like any other check. So you can always apply effort and lower the difficulty, but you can also at that point apply effort for damage, because damage is kind of static otherwise. You get damage based on your weapon size. So, pardon me. So a dagger is, I think, 2 points of damage always. But because it's small and light, it lowers the difficulty to hit automatically. So if it was a level 4 monster that you were trying to hit, it defends as a level 4, and you are fighting it with a dagger, you're only having to roll to hit a difficulty 3 without spending any effort because you're using a light weapon. But it's only going to do 2 points of damage. So you might decide that you want to apply effort so that you actually hit harder. So you say, I'm going to make this attack. I'd like to spend points out of my might to deliver a terrible blow. And so you spend 3 points out of your might pool, less your edge, which we didn't really talk about. But you have that. It's one more piece. We'll
talk about that when we play.
But so you decide that you're going to spend points out of your pool, and then you'll add 3 points to the damage roll. So instead of doing 2 points, you're going to do 5. So that's a really useful thing, and you can apply more than one level of effort if you have more than one effort that you can apply. And then you can even split that up. So you might say, well, I want to lower the difficulty by 1 step. I have an effort of 2, so I want to lower the difficulty by 1 step, and I want to apply a level of effort to damage. And you can split it up either way. You can lower the difficulty by 2 steps. You could increase the damage by 2 steps. Split it between the two evenly. Doesn't matter. You can spend nothing at all. And sometimes that becomes the game, is trying to decide, do I spend points out of this pool right now? Because if it hits me again, I could be in bad shape. But if I can take it out, there's some kind of fun thought processes that kind of go into how to strategically play sometimes. Right there in the middle of combat.
And by fun, he means really terrifying and challenging.
I find that fun.
Yeah, as the GM, you would.
I find it fun when I'm playing too.
Okay. He's weird.
Perhaps.
So, we did.
I was gonna say.
Sorry. I'm sorry, I derailed you.
You derailed me. That's all right. We'll just move on. It can't be that important. It's already gone.
So that was stat pools, damage track, spending effort. I think we've got just about everything. Looks like.
Well, I did bring up edge, so let's go ahead and cover edge real quick.
Okay.
So to apply 1 level of effort costs 3 points out of whatever pool it is that you're using. So in combat, it might be speed, might be might, and even it could be intellect if you've got a spell. If you're a character with magic or esoteries for the nanos and Numenera, where you're doing a mental action, it might come out of your intellect pool. When you spend a level of effort, it costs 3 points. But you do have another piece to each attribute called your edge. And the edge just reduces how much it's going to cost out of your pool. So when you go and you spend all your points, at the moment you're spending them, once you get the total, then you can take your edge off. So if I'm playing a warrior who has an edge of 2 in might, and I want to apply a level of effort, I like to spend 1 point. That's it. To apply a second level of effort, it costs an additional 2 instead of the full 3. So for 2 levels of effort, it would cost me 5. But if we're talking about that same warrior with the edge of 2, it's only going to cost me 3 points out of my pool. So it makes those characters who have invested in that a little bit hardier, and they can do more without exerting themselves. And that's what that's meant to represent, is that extra training, that extra time devoted to that keeps you from exhausting yourself too quickly. So why don't we look at your characters a little bit closer. We did get your sentence already, but go ahead and let's reiterate it so we can, and then we can talk about the descriptors, types, and focus that you guys have chosen. Scott, you want to go ahead and go first this time?
Oh, sure, I'll go first this time. So I'm playing Malcolm. He is a clever speaker who operates undercover.
Okay.
Speaker is, I guess, the speaker would be sort of the if you're looking at a traditional group, like a traditional party, speaker would be equivalent to a bard in a way, and that he'd be the voice box for the party, usually engaging in any kind of negotiations or
sort of the party diplomat.
yeah, thank you. My brain blanked.
It's going around tonight.
Oh, I know.
It's a lot of information. Here, I'll tell you what I looked up. I'll look up clever for you.
And then the focus of operates undercover. This could actually be sort of your traditional spy, like very James Bond-esque. As the character increases in levels, he'll not just be able to.
Well, hold on. Tiers. We've been playing. All right. Full disclosure, we've been playing a lot of Numenera, but we've also got decades of Pathfinder D&D. So we occasionally screw up. Tiers are player character advancements, and levels are NPC advancements in the Cypher system. We are trying to get our language right, but honestly, we're human. We screw up. But I just want to make sure we get the right terminology.
Right.
So,
right. So as the character advances in tier, there we go.
There we go.
At lower tiers, the abilities and skills available to this kind of character are all about investigation and disguise, and then as they advance, it'll be more about social trickery and there's almost a MacGyver-esque feel to this particular focus.
Mm-hmm.
Tier 5 is called using what's available, and you can actually scrounge together stuff that you need based on what's around you.
That's kind of cool.
That is cool.
So what are the two abilities that you have, or the tier abilities that you have for that?
Right now, the tier abilities I have are Investigate, which allows me to, gives me skills in perception and cryptography, deception, and for the setting that we're playing, more like lockpicking.
Right.
And then the tier 2 ability that I just picked up is it's called Master of Disguise, I think it was.
Okay.
And you get more training in the disguise ability.
So are you specialized?
Not specialized yet. Didn't have any yet.
Okay. So you're trained.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're trained in disguise.
Yes.
Okay.
And then Clever gives you some additions to your intellect pool and
Yes.
more
Clever
very
was-
and some more very intellectually additive things. I believe you had like trickery. I believe it's lies. Yeah,
Yes.
interactions involving lies and trickery.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
being skilled in mental defense as well as assessing any kind of task, specific, particularly, actually any kind of assessment really, identifying danger, lies, quality, importance, function, and power.
Mm-hmm.
I like to call it appraise all the things.
Appraise all the things. Yes.
I didn't realize you had an inability.
Mm-hmm. So, because he's so focused on being in the moment, I guess is probably the best way to phrase that. He's not so good at retaining trivia or lore. So, he's at a disadvantage when faced with
Like long-term
long-term study.
Yeah. That's good because I'm really good at that.
Ta-da!
Ta-da!
All right. So my Twitch on my phone has not been working real well. Looks like we do have a couple of viewers now. So
Hey,
hello,
yay.
guys.
Michael made it. Hello,
Yes.
Hi,
Michael.
guys. All right. Well, if you have any questions,
I
let
don't
us
know
know.
who that is.
What?
I don't know who that is.
I think it's Mike. Well, I won't out which Michael it is because I don't want to necessarily name people
It's
by
the
their
one, it's
last
the one
names.
you think it is.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
But I'm glad he's here.
I'm glad he's here too.
Yes, we are.
Yes, we are. All right, so we got your weird explorer and your MacGyver.
Yeah,
focus.
real quick. I want before we delve into your character real quick.
Uh-huh.
I do want to point out that for those people who are coming from games that are more like D&D and Pathfinder, where they're like, oh, there's all these options and things. There are a ton of options available in the Cypher system because of these three choices you make. There's so many options. There are only like 3 to 5, well, 6 now types in any one of the settings for the most part, but you have in the core book, I want to say there were like what, 30 descriptors,
I think so. There were
and
quite a
then
few.
the descriptors cross over. So if you have the Strange and it has descriptors in it that you want to use in your Numenera game, those descriptors can carry over. You can carry over your descriptors from the Cypher book because they use all the same mechanics. So all of those descriptors are available, and at this point there are a ton of them. Those are, like we said early, very small changes to the character, but they're noticeable. They're sort of on par with picking a race in D&D or Pathfinder. They don't last for a real long time. They don't make a big change over time, but they do make a big change from the get-go. They do sort of establish
That
who
little
you
extra
are.
boost you need in the beginning to
Right.
be better than average.
Well, to be something kind of specific.
Well, and that was something that was part of the original design, if I recall correctly, was that they didn't want their first tier characters to feel like they were just a step above the commoner, that they really were more heroic.
Yeah, a tier 1 character is not a schmuck.
No.
No, they're not a joke. But the game's balanced nicely so that while they're not a joke, they're also not the apex of ability already.
No.
They're not the biggest hero on the block. They have a lot of room to grow. There's 6 tiers that you can play through, so there's a lot of opportunities to improve your character. And there's a lot of granular changes because you don't just go up a level. As you spend experience points, you pick up, and we saw this in the stream last game. As you spend experience points, you pick up an ability. You improve one of your pools, and once you've done 4 different things to improve your character, then you go up a tier and you get your tier abilities. But you have to do 4 things first. Going back to where I was kind of starting before I kind of got tangent here. The creating a character, the flexibility, you've got, like I said, like 30 something descriptors. You've got somewhere between 3 and 6 types, and then there are a number of foci. And if you're using the Cypher System rulebook, you may find that you're not using all the foci in the book because you might be playing a gritty. Yeah, you may be playing a gritty, realistic police drama set in the modern era. So you only have a handful of things that you can't do. Where's a sheen of ice? You can't ride the lightning. You can't bear a halo of fire because it's not magical. But you could wield 2 weapons at once. You could be licensed to carry. You could be, throws with deadly accuracy. A lot of those things, those all stand. The operates undercover. Those would all still function. And some of those would function in a fantasy setting. And you just kind of have to, you'll work with your GM and they'll kind of establish what the tone and the theme and the tone for your game, and then you guys can all work together and use the abilities that you want to use. You may find that something that doesn't seem like it fits right off the shelf works, but just a little bit of a tweak here and there. Like we were doing the operates undercover for this game. This is a not a modern game. There are no computers, and one of the things that fell under there was you could use computers, right?
It was something like hacking or something.
Yeah, it was like hacking. So we just kind of tweaked that around. Instead of being trained in hacking, he was trained in opening locks, which is what you were alluding to earlier. So there's a lot of different options. You can really get granular and major changes in your characters, and no two characters are going to be alike at the table. Sorry about the big digression there. Monica, why don't you tell us about what you're playing?
You mean my weirdo?
Yeah, you're weirdo.
My weirdo.
How weird are you?
I am so weird. I'm wearing horns. So
She's so weird they named a game after her.
no, I don't think they did.
The weird is not a thing.
No, I don't think so.
Aw.
No, that's the strange.
Oh, the strange. Dang it.
But there's always room for expansion. So as a weird explorer who would rather be reading, explorer is kind of a little bit of roguey, kind of a little bit of fighter. The first level, the first tier of explorer gets an edge and might, and so that kind of lends itself to being more of a fighter type feel of a type to me. But as you go through, each of the different types get their class features have different names. As we mentioned, nanos get esoteries. In this case, the explorer actually gets abilities. And the explorer gets a lot of abilities, but they mostly then end up being things like skills or fighting boosts or things like that. So a couple of things that I did choose to go with were some additional physical skills, knowledge skills. I actually have a special ability that I really like that I've played in other games called the Cypher, where my character can spend a little bit of intellect out of the intellect pool and study a language and then figure it out. So it kind of plays into that the vibe that I'm kind of going for with my character, which is our characters were intended to be sort of a con artist team, and so where one of us doesn't have the ability to maintain and remember trivia, the other character has a lot of book smarts. So I ended up with, but I could have taken things like block and danger sense or endurance. So I could have taken the character in a little bit more of a physical fighter style, or I could take it in a little bit more of a bookworm. And because I went with would rather be reading, I think you probably could figure out which way I decided to go. The second tier allowed me to get even more abilities, and those, again, I took were a lot more skills. I did take something called hand to eye, which is manual dexterity, essentially. Allows me to do things like pickpocketing. Not sure when I'll ever need something like pickpocketing or lockpicking. But then I actually did take some investigative skills, which was perception, and then I did take lockpicking with that. But assessing danger and tinkering with devices, a lot of fun. I've played with those before, and that's actually great for rights because they can tinker and do some things. And then traveling skills. In this case, I went with riding and navigating. And for weird again, like with Scott's character, he had the ability to hack computers, and the computers didn't exist where we were at. Weird allowed me to be trained in supernatural knowledge, and while supernatural knowledge would be useful in a fantasy setting, we actually kind of reskinned it a little to forbidden lore because really that's a little bit more setting feeling specific than supernatural. Now, if we were playing a more modern setting, or even more importantly, an actual supernatural styled game, that would be fantastic, and that would be something a hunter could definitely take. And then lastly, my would rather be reading also gives me a huge bonus to my intellect pool. So I've not actually, when I leveled my character, I have not actually bought any additional intellect points to my pool. I boosted my might and my speed because now my intellect pool is a 19. So it goes up pretty fast, and it does look like that might be something that my character will have other boosts in different ways. She'll eventually get more additional combat skills and assisting others with helping with her big brain knowledge. And eventually, the tier 6 for would rather be reading is you're trained in intellect defense tasks. If you're already trained, then you become specialized in those tasks instead. So there's a lot and you get some more non-combat skills. So by the time I get done, and I'm only on level 2, and I'm not sure if you can see this, but the little tiny section here where my intellect skills go is already full. And I have a feeling I'll be carrying that over to back here. Which, actually, now that I can kind of show you this, I really like the character sheets. They're really nice. They actually trifold if you are so inclined to do that. They allow you... The ciphers are set up a little bit differently than the Numenera. They actually have a little bit more information on the back. But they're very, very, very brief. And yet they're very flexible because you kind of put everything where you want it. That's kind of my character, I think, in a nutshell. Did I miss anything? Anything good?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. I like to ramble. So, I think that puts us in the...
So,
do we know if Deborah's in tomorrow?
She is, but we won't be streaming tomorrow.
Oh.
Tomorrow we will be... So...
Because the question came up.
Yeah, so tomorrow we will...
Who asked what?
Horror Punk asked if Deborah, where Deborah was. I said she's not in this one, but tomorrow could be a different story.
Yes. And we may... All right, so... I'm thinking we may stream tomorrow, but we weren't going to make a big deal about it. So those of you who are here, tune in.
This is your special invitation. Your
Yeah,
platinum...
To you
your
personally.
Platinum subscriber invitation.
But I think we're going to probably start kind of early. It might be 4 or 5. Are we thinking 5 o'clock?
It'll be... I believe it's 5 o'clock start time is what we had scheduled.
Yeah, we'll update. We'll actually post eventually.
We'll post a little bit. Sneak a post in. The plan is sound work, everything else at about 4, an hour to decompress.
And eat pizza.
And then we would get together and actually start playing.
Yeah.
So...
But things are always flexible. We are flexible people.
So the plan is to start playing tomorrow at 5. Do look for us to be streaming. I'm going to try to stream, even if it just ends up being me and a camera and a microphone rambling for an hour. I'm going to try to stream every Friday night at 9 o'clock. So do watch for that. But tomorrow we're going to do a stealth stream.
So we can record it and put it up, if
Right.
nothing else. So
Well, we can record it without streaming, but I kind of want to sneak a stream in.
okay. He's drunk with power, streaming
visibility.
power. All right. So I think now
Well,
we're
before
gonna
we do that,
talk about-
before we do that, this is called the Cypher System, and its name is actually derived from one very specific mechanic: ciphers
magic items.
or inspirations.
Yeah.
Since we're currently playing in a setting with subtle ciphers, there are magic items. Those would be considered artifacts, but these are subtle ciphers, and I think they're going to be. I think from reading the stuff on the Kickstarter, I think they're going to be the standard in the revised Cypher System rulebook that's due out next year. Don't quote me on that. I have no idea. I may just be remembering incorrectly, but that is what I understand. So what I like to use for subtle ciphers is actually what they call an asset deck, which were like suggestions for assets, but they work really nicely for a large number of random ciphers. That's it. I mean, this is using the whole deck. This is like half of my deck. I split off part of it and just wanted to have enough to have handy. So what's your cipher limit there, Monica?
You know what? It was, I think, 2, but it probably went up.
Did you not check?
Why would I check? Gosh. I only just leveled this character.
It sounded to me shuffling.
That's in my...
Your type.
That's what I thought. It doesn't say anything. Oh.
It will, if it doesn't say anything, it probably didn't increase.
I will never... Oh, at level 5, I finally get 4. So, I don't see... Apparently
I think
not.
it's odd. I think it's the odd tiers.
It probably is.
There's a suggestion if you're able to do it.
What?
Yeah, to
Michael
swap.
suggests swapping mine and Monica's windows so that we appear to be more looking at you.
Yeah, that would probably make sense. We'll do that after the break.
We want it to look like we're ignoring him because that's usually how it goes anyway.
Yes. That's why Scott and I usually are looking at each other.
I was actually going to do that originally, and I forgot to do it.
I reminded you to record. You didn't ask me to remind you to do anything
And we
else.
turned the mics on this time. I mean, what else do you want from us? Okay, so anyway.
More power.
We are so dead.
So you've
So
got a cipher limit of 2.
2.
So there's 2 subtle ciphers
Thank
for you.
you.
And then yours is what, a 1 or a 2?
Mine's 2.
2?
I love the
Oh, you
name
still
on this
have
one.
your 2 from last
Still
week.
have my 2 from last time.
You can keep those.
Okay.
I gave mine back.
Okay. Let's take a 5-minute break,
Okay.
and then we will come back and roll some dice.
Yay.
Start playing. This will be a very short game, guys. It's just mainly to do demo purposes so that we can kind of get everybody up to speed on the rules so that you understand what it is that we're doing when we play. But
So blow up the world.
We can totally blow up the world. Oh, wait, that's a different adventure. We'll play that one later.
It's a Fix and Shadow side quest.
It is a Fix and Shadows. We should do that.
and we'll be back.
And you're just having fun.